Welcome to Future Ready. I'm really glad that you are here with us today. In the first episode of Future Ready, we talked about how the workforce is changing and leadership really has to change too. We talked about how the new workforce really is going to include digital teammates. I recently talked about AI as a tool is going away, more AI as a teammate is, I think, the future. And I think that change is happening rapidly. I think we're at the cusp of seeing that start to integrate into the flow of work every day. And then in the second episode, we talked about the need to move the conversation from jobs to skills and competencies and what that looks like. And so for this third episode, I think it's going to be a really great next step in the evolution of this conversation. I am joined today by Chris Cook, founder of Black Box Zero, an enterprise AI governance consulting firm focused on the mid-market, healthcare, and financial services space, where regulatory stakes are high. Chris was IBM's deputy chief auditor, where he built their first AI audit program. He has a background in computer science, finance, and audit, and he served on their AI ethics board. He built Black Box Zero because he kept hearing the same thing from boardrooms. We know AI is being used across our company without controls, and we are worried about it. And that is exactly the conversation that I want to have with you today, Chris. So welcome to Future Ready. I'm so glad to have you here.
It's great. Thank you, Karen. I'm really glad to be here. And I can't imagine a more timely series. And I'm really thrilled to be participating in this.
Yeah.
HR is right at the front of the whole AI revolution. I think it's very timely. I think the topic of both HR and the governance aspect is especially relevant here. I'm thrilled to join you today to kick it around with you a little bit.
Excellent. Well, I know from my own experience leading talent strategy at a 28,000 employee clinical research organization, that's a highly regulated industry. And I saw firsthand how enthusiasm for new tools can outrun a governance infrastructure. I've written a little bit about how just get started with AI is not a strategy. We have to look at why are we using this? What's the goal? Right. And so I think we're seeing a lot of new AI tools in the HR space. But from your perspective, what are the risks that we need to be concerned about, especially for companies in highly regulated industries?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think HR touches a lot of sensitive information. So first of all, if I just step back for a second, I think there are so many great use cases for AI in HR. You see it already across the board used for hiring, for candidate selection. A lot of companies are doing it for internal promotions or pay scale evaluations. As a general purpose tool, it has a lot of applicability. But the HR function touches a lot of private personal information. And so the controls around it are super important. And so in general, HR has a lot of sensitivity, I'll say, to using AR, but also a lot of upside because so many things are like policies that are well documented, structured responses. What I see is a lot of companies are deploying chatbots, for example, internally to help take off some of the load from the HR professionals on standard questions, payroll or vacation accruals or whatever it is. But and those tend to be lower risk dynamics in general, because if you get it wrong, you can fix it later. With employees, you can kind of fix it as well. It gets to be more difficult when the company is starting to interface with the outside world, which HR also does, for example, in the hiring realm. That's where mistakes get much more significant and much more serious. So that's where I typically see the guardrails coming in much more strongly inside of a company as they're kind of evaluating HR use cases and deploying HR for efficiencies. I think for HR professionals, it can both give them back time, it can streamline a lot of the work they're doing, but can also help them get an edge on how they help and support the staff and the employees in the organization. It is kind of like a superpower. If you know how to use it properly, it can help unearth things that you couldn't find on your own easily or efficiently. It can help you brainstorm new ideas, which is one of the best uses for AI because that's relatively low risk. And that's one of those places, strangely enough, where hallucinations actually help because they're giving you
Mm.
some new thought that you would not have normally come across. And not to say that they're all good, but it actually can provide good value. So I think depending on the use case in the HR function, you'll have different levels of need for governance and risk. But it's going to be really coming down to the particular use case being deployed, the client on the outside, and then we can talk about it in a little bit if you like, but also the ever-present risk of shadow AI, which is sort of a whole glossy layer on top of regular use cases that we can talk about.
So say a little bit more about that when you say
Hmm.
shadow AI, just for our listeners who might not know what you mean. Talk a little bit about that.
Right, right. So shadow AI is any AI use inside of the company that's not being cataloged or captured in the company's risk register, the risk database for AI use cases. So companies, as part of their governance, have to look at all the cases they're using and say, is this a high risk? Is it low risk? If you're using AI and not using any of the company tools and not using something they're tracking, that's
Mm.
shadow AI.
Yeah.
And the way
So
you see it
employees
is
using AI on their own, like Claude or
using
ChatGPT or Gemini, but they're using it outside of the parameters of the tech stack of the company.
absolutely. And it's a tricky problem because it's not just, close a firewall port. It's not just go to your CIO and fix it. This is like how people use AI. So you have
Right.
to approach it in a way that people operate, which means you have to do it in a multifaceted way, which is where I think HR has a lot of value to add.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a difficult, yeah, that's a tricky one, right?
It's a
Because
very tricky one.
you
Yeah.
can't, it's hard to know what people are doing on their own computer, right? They could be doing work
Mm,
stuff on their own, which has always been a problem. People doing work stuff on their
right.
personal devices, but this, I think, compounds that issue
The risk in the HR
exponentially.
world, it does. In the HR world, especially because you really do have access to such sensitive information that if there's careless use, it can exit the organization and that can create real issues. But that said, there are ways to address it and to contain it. Nothing is perfect. You can never get 100% guarantee, but most employees aren't using shadow AI because they're trying to be difficult or tricky. They're just trying to get their jobs done more efficiently and faster. That's the
Yeah.
motivation. So there are ways you can engineer the organization and processes to manage it, and that will get rid of 99% of the problems, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think giving people the tools they want
Mm,
with the thorough structure in which you want them to use it. And I think also being transparent with employees about the real risk of
yep,
using shadow AI, right? Or
right.
and because I think, when governance fails, right, it's not just it can be a fine, it can be a crippling fine, but it's
Sure,
not just about that. There's a trust breakdown,
there
right? And I
is.
think um transparency with employees, building trust with employees,
Hmm.
that's the credibility that you build your culture on. And
Right.
so I think AI governance, I think people want AI governance,
Hmm.
right? I think
Hmm.
yeah, I think that's a really critical piece.
Everyone
Um
wants to do the right thing. I mean, that is what they
yes.
want to do at the end of the day. So it's really about engineering pathways so that they can do it easily and still get their job done and still be able to use the tools. So just as you mentioned, making sure they've got the tools they want. If they can't have it, that needs to be documented for why. So somebody can go look at it in the policy and say, oh, I get it. I can't use that one, but I have an alternative. That's a great answer too. There are some technical things you can do to block out firewall ports and other things, but it gets trickier. Sometimes people install add-ins to their Chrome browser, and that grabs what's in their browser and sends it out. They may not be aware that it's going out to a third party when they install a new browser add-on. So you've got
Interesting.
to sort of track all this in regulated industries in particular.
And
It's
this, I mean,
very,
that feels like a really important thing for people in learning
mm,
to right, like, because I think a lot of times it falls on the learning, the the L&D group in an
Right.
organization to make sure
Hmm.
employees know what they need to know to do
That's
their
right.
jobs, right? And so,
Absolutely.
that's, I think, a really important, uh, that's an important point that I think our L&D colleagues need to just keep that in mind, that a lot of this security, I know like L&D groups in partnership with IT will often put together, right,
Hmm.
especially at larger corporations, like tests, right, like
Right.
phishing tests and
Right.
things
Right.
like
Right.
that. Like
Hmm.
maybe the future is rolling toward having some sort of tests around your AI usage, or just yeah,
Hmm.
I don't, it's really
This is where
interesting.
HR, I think, adds a ton of value. Actually, there is a training component to this. There's probably some kind of annual certification component to this. All of that typically runs through HR in major
Yeah.
companies. And so that would all be natural places where HR can help apply this governance to make sure it's managed well for the company. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's certainly, I think governance in general it's not an IT problem, right? It is a workforce design issue.
It
And
really is.
if the workforce is a blend, like we said a little bit ago, if the workforce
Hmm.
is a blend of humans
Mm.
and AI agents, AI
Yep.
teammates,
Yep.
someone has to own the guardrails. And actually,
Mm.
I was in a conversation recently. Um, I think it was just this week. Someone asked a question,
Mm.
who, where does the buck stop? Right?
Mm.
If
Great
you,
question.
oh my goodness. So if you
Yeah.
have these AI teammates
Yep.
working alongside your
Yeah.
human workers, and they do some, like, let's say your AI teammates do something, whether it's ethics or governance
Yep.
violation or
They
what
make a
have
mistake.
you,
They just make
they
a
make a
mistake. A bad
mistake.
judgment call, make a mistake. Yeah.
Who who's
Who's
responsible
responsible?
for that
Absolutely.
mistake?
Absolutely.
So what do you think, Chris?
This is the thorny problem with AI because it's not like a image editing program where every time you use it, you get an image out of it. It's very clear what the use case is. AI is more like a hammer. You can use it to build a house, or you can use it to build a bridge, or you can use it to take dents out of a car, but it's a general purpose tool. So it all comes back to the use case, which is why it's so hard to figure out where the buck stops, right?
Yeah.
So it varies really by company, depending on the kind of company, if it's a regulated industry, what kind of industry in general, how big the company is. What I've been seeing when I talk to companies about who owns the AI mandate, typically, if it is something like a financial services firm, the chief risk officer will own the mandate for that on behalf of the corporation, but will
Okay.
work with people beneath them to manage it. Some
Okay.
companies actually have a chief AI officer. That person will be
Okay.
tagged with it, but that's an emerging role. It's not really prevalent across the industries yet. A lot
Yeah.
of companies give it to their CISOs. They say it's a tech issue. And it's not really fully tech. It is tech, but it's more than tech. But they put
Yeah.
it in the tech umbrella, and then they reach in and grab people from legal or some other function as they need to. But it really is cross-functional, which is why it's so tricky to figure out who exactly owns it. But it's also why it's such an important element of the governance roadmap to figure
Yeah.
out who does own it in your company. That's a
Yeah.
critical question to answer.
Yeah. And it does feel like there should be, in any company, like I would say to any company today that if you don't have this, you should, but it seems like there should be a cross-functional
Hmm.
senior leadership
Yes.
AI governance committee. Do you agree with that?
Mhm. I absolutely agree with it. I think this is too big to handle in a silo. It's
Yeah.
too multifaceted. There are too many implications to when it goes wrong. It's not just a technical mistake. You'll affect employees, potentially clients. You may have societal ramifications. If you're doing lending, then you may have disparate impact to different populations. And
Yeah.
it can be tricky to catch. So there's a lot of dimensions to it. It really a cross-functional governance committee is one of the best ways to make sure you're tracking all the aspects of it holistically.
Yeah. And it feels like it should be, I think, delegating it down into the organization I think there probably should be subcommittees, right? Because people
Yeah.
know, like people who know the real process, right? But I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
if the buck is going to stop with senior leadership, like
Hmm.
they really should be setting the tone for the governance, and then maybe there's subcommittees that are really working out from a process perspective how that works. But
Yeah, there's
okay,
going to be kind of two levels I would suggest. There is that
yeah,
top down as you're describing, which is that senior governance committee, very cross-functional, senior leadership who owns the mandate.
yep,
But then you're going to have those subcommittees, as you described, or functional units who may be responsible for pieces. For example, when I was at IBM, we built the AI audit program and use AI to conduct audits. So we both had experience using the AI practically, but then also how do you validate that somebody else is using it correctly? Now, I was part of the audit function, which is why I had that mandate. But each pillar will have its own. Communications will have its own. What kind of press dynamics do you want to have around this? What is your contingency plan when the AI makes a mistake? Because AI will make a mistake.
yeah,
It will. So you need a plan. So don't assume
yeah,
it's always going to be perfect or that you can trap 100% because there's going to be some failure rate. Yes, you can minimize it. And depending on how high risk the process is that you're using AI in, you may have a very small threshold for error, or you might have a medium threshold. But if it's very small, you're still going to have errors. So if you
yeah,
just always realize that somewhere, sometime, it's going to break down,
yeah,
then you can go to the next step, which is then what do we do? And that's where this
right,
cross-functional committee comes back into play because there are going to be multi things you're going to have to do to address it.
yeah, yeah. Fascinating. It's like there I have so many questions I could go down, but I want to actually get to something that I really think that the audience will love to hear from you. So
Hmm.
I'd love for you to walk our audience through your prime
Hmm.
framework.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I just take it away.
Yeah, sure. So the prime framework is really a way for someone at the manager level who's looking at implementing AI to understand the scope of the project in terms of risk and the things they should be thinking about around the governance. So it's really not meant to be somebody who's coding the AI itself. It's above that. It's in the management layer. And it's really an acronym for the 5 things that you'll want to consider before embarking on the AI project so that you can understand the weaknesses in the process and you can set it up to be as bulletproof as it gets when the regulators come asking questions. When it fails, as I mentioned, it will do before. So PRIME really stands for 5 things. It's the purpose, the risk, the inputs, the model, and the evidence, and they go in that order. So the purpose is first just documenting what is your purpose for AI. 2 years ago, when ChatGPT 4 was announced at the end of 2023, that's when it really exploded on the scene for enterprises that this whole AI thing was real and useful and practical for commercial day-to-day work. They were doing a lot of testing, a lot of proof of concepts, but nobody was really documenting cases at that time. What's the purpose of the model? And so we've seen a lot of those failing. They get shelved and they say, oh, we wasted a lot of effort and time on it, didn't really yield anything because nobody went through that effort to initially say, what are we trying to accomplish with this AI implementation? That's the
Mhm.
first step to
And
really
don't you
getting
think
a,
that I sorry to
yeah.
interrupt, but I don't you think that is continues to be the biggest problem? Like we keep hearing about 90 something percent of AI implementations fail. Don't you think
Mhm.
it's because they didn't really clearly define a purpose?
Yeah, it largely is still true. We have a
Yeah.
holdover of projects that were started a while ago and they've sort of lost momentum, but they're not maybe closed yet or terminated. But I think we're going to see more of that. The other big hurdle that's emerging now in 2026 is this whole renewed focus on ROI. It used to just
Hmm.
be use AI, get experience, let's figure out how to use it.
Yeah.
It's now
We'll
shifting
figure out
to
the
no,
ROI later, but now
yeah,
later is
we don't
here.
want 100 use cases. We want 3, and they have to have a really good ROI. So the filter
Yeah.
is getting much more strict going forward as well. But I'm with
Yeah.
you. We still have what I'll call kind of zombie POCs that we're still working through, and so I think we're going to have a little bit of a long tail of that still.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So purpose. So then risk.
So purpose. So the risk then is a procedural step through of the ways this could go wrong, thinking about your different constituencies. So you're going to want to think about it from an employee perspective. If you put this model in place, is it going to displace a large proportion of your employees? What are you going to do then? Do you have employee unions or other things that may prohibit you from doing this, or that may have a decision right in the whole implementation process? Obviously, one of the risks could be that your externally facing chatbot makes a mistake and a client gets upset, or you have a bad decision in a medical field for a medication or a credit score in the financial services, and those bring regulators. Thinking about risk along all those different dimensions so that you can begin to get your head around where this could go wrong is going to be a huge help to constraining where you've got to put protections in place and where you're going to be okay taking a little more risk. So it's really kind of a methodical stepping through of that. The inputs is going to be the data that's coming into it. What are the writing down the sources of data? Are they PII or PHI? How is it going to be ingested? Is it tagged properly? I tell people before you can have a good AI strategy, you actually need to have a data strategy.
Yeah.
And it has to be properly segmented so that the high sensitivity stuff is flagged as such. Otherwise, the AI is just going to pull it and it's not going to know the difference. So you do need to be working in tandem with your CIO and your CISO. That is absolutely part of making this work well.
Yeah. From a lot of the conversations I've had, I would say that is probably the second most common thing that I hear. So, so purpose being the first most common, but then trying to either implement AI with bad data or just mushing it on top of, for lack of a technical term, on top of existing processes.
Right.
Instead of, and I don't know if that is part of your inputs, like the process, but really not rethinking or reimagining how the process might be more efficient with AI, but just trying to put AI on top of existing process. So those are, yeah. So I think that input layer is really, that's an important one.
It's a hard one because a lot of companies, especially if they're smaller, haven't yet put a lot of energy and time into sorting through their data. And AI sometimes when it goes on top of it, it surfaces things people forgot was there. And so suddenly all this stuff, people look at the top 20 articles in the database, they don't realize there's 400 others that were written over the last couple of years, and they have maybe conflicting perspectives or they're out of date, and the AI will just pull it. So like this data management is actually quite important to feeding the AI engine to make sure it gives you data you can trust and rely on.
And I think even big companies, especially big companies who grew through acquisition, will often have disparate data.
Yep, absolutely.
And so trying to figure out, I think AI there's potentially help you to consolidate that, but you still have to clean it up and make sure that the AI is pulling the same, the same data fields, right? For similar purposes. Yeah. It's an interesting, the data piece, I think, is a huge and interesting problem.
It really is. It really is. It's a fascinating topic. It's got a lot of potential because AI is actually one of the tools that allows you to look at unstructured data and make sense of it. That was one of the major breakthroughs on AI. Always we've had databases, but somebody had to go in and put in a key pair, very regimented, very structured, and that's hard to scale. But unstructured text is easy to scale because you have millions of emails out there. You have millions of data files that are just typed by somebody in a field, and it's not a structure, but you want the data that's in there anyway. So it unlocked a lot of things, but as you're pointing out, you do have to be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So then model.
So the model. So this is now the engine, the decision process that it uses. This is where you've got to be careful about the things you see in the press about how it comes to the conclusion it comes to. Does it select on zip codes, which inadvertently deselects parts of society that are protected classes, for example? You didn't mean to, you picked zip codes, but it winds up being a proxy for other things which are protected. How did it make those decisions? Is it really making proper and appropriate decisions? Does it have bias? Does it have drift? You've perfectly tuned your AI engine. Everything is great. 6 months later, your clients are using different language, or you've expanded to other countries, and suddenly your model isn't really fitting your clients perfectly anymore. That's just drift. That's just life going on. But you've got to be on top of it, and you got to keep re-engineering the model. All of this is that model section where you've got to make sure that it's producing what you're expecting it to produce, what you can test through auditing and other back-end functions later to make sure that the model is acting appropriately and within the guardrails.
And what do you think about some of the, I think, like very recent developments in AI where it is sort of checking itself on that type of thing, right? Like, and I think I'm not sure if this would fall into this category or not, but just reading recently about newer versions of some of the AI LLMs that have coded themselves, like the AI actually created the newest version of itself.
Right.
So I don't know if that falls into your model category, but like I'm curious your thoughts on like could the model prevent that drift on its own? Do you
The models
see
are
that?
definitely getting better. They're as you're seeing, I mean, every month, all of the major engines produce new versions. They're faster, more complete, extended thinking, adding graphics, voices, music, video. Every month, it's moving quickly. They're definitely improving. So I think it'll get better and better and better as they go. And even though the underlying machinery of an LLM is just a statistical model, in practice, all the major companies have put hacks in place to make it better. So a simple sort of thought experiment is if you're doing a query in your LLM, it could give you 2 out of 100 could be wrong answers. What you could say, since you don't know, you might say, when you give me an answer, test the answer. And if it's wrong, rerun the answer. And don't come back to me until you're positive you've got the right answer. Now that will guarantee that you'll get the right answer. But the problem is the query might run for 2 hours. It might keep getting wrong answers in one way or another way or another way until finally one of the runs is perfect. That's like very expensive on the computer, but you can do it. You can get it done. But it's a hack. It's not like the machine is much smarter. It's that you ran it a million times, and so eventually you landed on a good answer. That's not a great way to operate, right?
Okay.
But they're improving these kinds of things where it is going back and just checking before it gives you the answer that it answered the key elements of your question as it could define, or other things that make it feel better. And it actually is better, but it's still just a statistical model at the end of it. So the trick is to make sure you're remembering that you're not talking to a person. It's not reasoning really. It's just calculating the next best answer based on what you wrote. And that's a very different kind of approach.
Yeah. Fascinating. All right. And then the last letter of your acronym, the evidence.
The evidence. So this is your proof of what it did and why. So this is when the regulators come calling 6 months later because a class action suit's been initiated, and they want to know why your model selected these 20 people when it shouldn't have in their view. You've got to have the logs in place to go back and say, at that time we were running this version of the model. It looked at these features and produce this output. And you've got that track somewhere so you can surface it. And not track somewhere like, I'll get back to you in a month with it. Track somewhere like in 2 days, you'll have the report on your desk. It has to be readily available. That's what a regulator looks for to make sure that you're in control of the situation. And so having that evidence log is really important, and you've got to collect it when it's making the decision. To your point a minute ago, you can't really go back and reconstruct it because then you're creating a new trail. What you really want to do is unearth the old trail. And that means you need to record the old trail when it's happening. So just making sure you're architecting this all the way through so that you're later in a great position that you can demonstrate that you've put a lot of thought in the front.
You can show.
You tested it, and you've got evidence on why it did what it did. And it will make mistakes. That's why you need all this in place, because it's AI. It's generative. It creates, and that means it'll make mistakes. And so you got to have documentation and evidence in place that you manage this responsibly if you're going to have, do this in a societally beneficial way.
Okay. Well, I love that.
So I think if you tick through those, anybody ticking through those, I think can get a sense for, is this a high risk thing we're dealing with? Is this a low risk or medium? And then they can begin to gauge what kind of resources they want to put against it. And so, external hiring, maybe the first filter is okay to pass through AI, but then the second filter needs to be a human. So when we bring it sort of to the HR professional, there might be stages of the process that are more applicable for it than others. But this is a great way to kind of get your arms around how AI is going to be used in your process. And it also gets you thinking about the process broadly instead of just the piece that hits your desk. It also gives you that wider aperture, and you'll pretty quickly find that you got to talk to the legal team. because there's some legal aspects here. You got to talk to the CIO because you're not sure if you have access to the data that you're going to need. And it'll sort of naturally broaden you out to get this put in place across a broader team.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so some people are going to ask the question, isn't governance just going to slow us down? So,
Right.
and as someone who has led transformation
Yeah.
many times through my career, I know that having a really solid transformation
Mm.
framework, change management in
Mm.
place actually does not slow things down, right? But it can
Yeah.
feel like it in the beginning.
Right.
So talk to me a little bit about that. Like, how does governance slow things down, or does it actually get you to the result you want more quickly?
Yeah. So I guess I would sympathize with the claim if a company was only going to put in place one AI solution and they were done. If that's the case, then you got to put a lot of work in place to deploy it. Now, if you don't have good governance, you can still get tied up by the courts or by customers for mistakes, which I would argue is still a friction you'd like to avoid. But the real operating day-to-day benefit inside the company of having good governance is that once you've designed it and put in place processes to manage it, you can then expand it incrementally at almost no additional governance cost. So
Mm,
when I talk to companies, they say, I really want to put AI into this particular function. That's great. You put governance around it. Yes, you got to put some time into designing policies. You got to name somebody who owns the whole process so that you have a person who's responsible and accountable. Yes, you've got to design controls. You have to set up some logging. There's some effort there. There is. But then you're going to see it's working and you want to add a second piece of AI onto it. Or you have a totally independent AI application, but you've already got one working well. That just leverages all the same governance constructs. So
yeah.
now you get to add it on very quickly with almost no extra cost. Proof of concept cases can be approved quickly because you already know what you're dealing with and you know what's contained. So that's not a high risk for the company. And so you can really begin to accelerate. And the more you do this, the more durable your governance gets. So it
Yeah.
becomes a virtuous cycle where you start to have this flywheel effect where you have good governance. So you get good AI deployment. So you have good governance and you get to be able to accelerate. And that for me is the definition of competitive advantage.
Yeah. And then, okay, so would you say that then this is also where governance can really help you realize that ROI that you're looking for?
I do think so. The governance has multiple ways it drives ROI. There's sort of the direct fines and legal avoidance, which everybody gets. But there's more practical day-to-day aspects of it too. Not only can you deploy AI faster and get the benefits of AI in your organization for other cost efficiencies that it might drive, for example, but also more and more you're seeing in the public sector and with major financial institutions, when they issue RFPs, they're now scoring on AI governance. And so if you don't have a process in place that you can document and prove, you don't get those points. You might lose the RFP. So you can begin to draw a line to revenue based on the support that you put in place for this. Vendors, the kind of governance you have in place will allow you to have different contracts with your vendors. You may not be able to push all of the risk of the model back to them. Maybe they're a really big vendor and you don't have that much market power, but you might be able to argue for carve-outs or higher caps on limitations of liability, which will protect you financially that way. And
Mhm.
cybersecurity insurance also is more and more looking at AI governance terms when they price those premiums to you.
Sure.
So there's a lot of different ways you can add value and incrementally help by having good governance, other than the fact that you're actually just deploying AI responsibly and getting more durable governance and benefit from the AI itself.
I could keep asking you questions about that, but this is going to be a 2-hour episode if we keep going down that road. So, but I do just want to make an observation because
Mm,
I think that people are nervous, right? I
mm,
think people are nervous about AI taking their job,
mm,
um, or so actually I have some uh, references here. So Mercer's 2026 data shows that employee anxiety about AI related job loss has jumped from 28% to
mm-hmm,
42 or to 40%. And then
mm-hmm,
62% of employees say leaders are underestimating the emotional impact of not
mm,
knowing what's going to happen.
mm-hmm,
And so I think this idea of governance, it protects you legally and from a compliance perspective. It helps with ROI, but I
Hmm.
also think that it is a trust signal for your people, and
Hmm.
not necessarily that it's promising them whether or not their job is going to start being
Hmm.
done by AI, right? Like that's, but I think that when people see that leadership have a point of view
Hmm.
and a stance on anything,
Right.
it reduces that anxiety. It reduces that resistance, right? And I think
Hmm.
that a lot of companies are seeing resistance to AI adoption. Um, I think there's a myriad of reasons for that, but I think one
Yeah.
of those reasons is leadership. And I think that
Mm.
really stepping into this governance framework
Mhm.
and owning it and being very clear about it
Mm.
actually can be that. I think people hear the word governance and they think,
Yeah,
oh, stodgy, right?
yeah, yeah,
But
they're
I
very
think
dry. Yes, I
actually
know.
it can come across as bold,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
If you do it right.
yep.
So yeah, so I think that that would be the case that I would want to make about this, is that governance and boldness are not opposite.
No, you're making a
Right?
strong case, actually. So governance, yes, helps the company. Yes, it helps deploy AI. But I think part of the markers of great governance is having a clearly defined policy, having clearly defined principles, having a clearly defined owner inside the company. All of that sets the terms with employees so they can understand, okay, this is how we're thinking of using AI. This is why we allow these tools, but don't allow these. This is who I go to when I want a new AI tool that they haven't considered before to have my case heard. This is
Yeah.
who I'm upset about and I can ask questions to, which is the communication piece. And even if I don't like the answers, I can at least have a person who can respond to me on what the dynamics are. All of those things I think help build trust because I think having the principles are actually an underappreciated aspect of this. Principles, they sound very lofty and far away, and they are meant to be statements of value and purpose and durable. And so they should not change often, every 3 or 5
Right.
years, maybe, because the company's principles should not change deeply,
Right.
as opposed to the policy, which does change more frequently.
Sure.
But the principles tell the employees, tell the management, what do we value as a team? And that's really, really important because you can see your alignment and you can argue for a different view. Maybe you think that these principles are too lax or too strict, and you can have that discussion on a non specifically confrontational topic, a principles discussion. You don't have to have an argument about the particular tool that you're working on. You can talk
Right.
about why are we all here? And that's a
Yeah,
great discussion.
it is. Yeah, it's meaty. People get passionate, but not
Yeah,
maybe not as defensive, right? Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would like to say to our viewers, who I think are probably mostly HR leaders, I want to encourage you, if your company, your organization is not having this conversation yet, you should start it, right? Bring your CFO, your general counsel, your head of IT, your head of cybersecurity, get them all in a room and start having this conversation. And I think if you're not sure where to start, Chris's Prime framework is a pretty great one.
Yep.
And so, Chris, I'd love to just have you spend a couple minutes like letting people know where can they find you if they want to talk to
Mm.
you further, and maybe any last points that you would like to share.
No, this is great. So first of all, super fun. This has been really
Yeah, it
interesting.
was
Really,
really
I
fun.
appreciate you setting the time up to do this. I think it's really timely and topical. So it's great. I guess I'll just make a couple quick points. The first is something I didn't really get into here, but everyone should be aware of. The EU AI Act goes into its most significant phase on August 2nd this year. That's when most AI models will now be covered by it. So for anybody who's got European operations or exposure to Europe, they're going to want to make sure that their company's AI aligns to that because it has very high penalties that are actually uncapped. They're a proportion of revenue in the worst case. So people should just be aware that that's coming. So if they want to talk internally about AI risk, that's something they could tee up right away.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say is the something people can proactively do now is just figure out who in their company owns the AI mission. So what you and I talked about right at the beginning here, that's such a critical basic question, but it's hard to figure out if you haven't actually asked. So I would just encourage people to go out and ask and try and figure out who that is, because that's your contact.
And I'm going to vote for HR.
I think it's great. It's certainly a very important voice in the room for all of these things. And then in terms of where people can find me, so of course I'm on LinkedIn. I would also maybe say if people are interested in governance and the various topics it touches, I do send out a weekly judgment call email. It's pretty short, one topic every week on Wednesdays. You can sign up on my website. It's a good, easy read. It's a point of view on one hot topic.
Title.
ROI is one of them. I think it's worth signing up for if people have an interest in this, because I try to make it engaging and talking about topical relevance of what people are using in your enterprise today. But otherwise, LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to reach me, of course, on the website, blackbox0.com.
Great. Fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much for spending time with me today. And to our viewers, I want to thank you for spending time with us. And let me know in the comments what you thought of this conversation. And also, if you have any ideas for other topics that you'd like to hear, I would love to hear it. Thank you so much. Take care.
This is really great. Thank you.
Absolutely.